Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Emmy Award winner Bill Harvey, in regards to his new book, A Theory of Everything, including consciousness and God. So are you looking for a book that would challenge your thoughts around higher consciousness and even if the universe is intelligent? Well, today's talk is just for you. It's such an honor to have Bill Harvey here again with us today. Our last discussion was so powerful, I felt we needed to bring him back to talk about this new book. So Bill Harvey is an Emmy Award winner and media research industry leader who has foretold and shaped the future of media for over 35 years. Bill's first book published was Mind Magic, now in its 6th edition. He currently has 6 books published, 3 nonfiction and 3 science fiction. His writings include the science fiction series Agents of Cosmic Intelligence, which is focused on helping individuals become more effective. In his works of fiction, he demonstrates the strength of his characters in action and zooms in on the inner processes that these characters use. Bill's worldview is open-minded, scientific, inclusive of the possibility that the universe is conscious, and that each of us experience the consciousness of the universe as our own consciousness, and that reality at its core is consciousness. In his nonfiction books, he provides experiments that his readers can do, which could lead them to the discovery that their hunches are meaningful and that the universe could be trying to give clues to each of us. So let's welcome to the show Emmy Award winner Bill Harvey.
Thanks so much, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you here for another discussion and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write A Theory of Everything, including consciousness and God?
Well, I wanted to share the good news with everyone. It's very practical to keep one's mind open to the possibility of the ancient idea of God. And science is coming around just recently to start to pay some serious attention to the idea that I've had for 50 years, that the universe is conscious.
Well, I'm so glad that you're sharing that in this book because I think, while there's old wisdom that talks about that, it's very new for the West when we talk about the consciousness of everything, especially when we talk about science bringing that in together. So in your book, you start just right at the beginning, inner life, and you talk about something that a lot of people, I think, get this feeling like, gosh, there's more to this life than just what's happening. So how do you get to this place where we're able to kind of really look at our lives and know that there's more to it than just what's here right now?
Well, there are a couple of things. I wrote this book for scientists. I wanted, and I stated in the book from the beginning, that the inner life is something that science has refused to pay serious attention to ever since William James. He was the last psychologist before we got so overtaken by the idea of everything has to be an experiment. There has to be a control group. You have to use measurements, which kind of excludes as evidence anything that we learn from common sense introspection. The other part of it is the inner life was something that back in the old days, way back, before we had the printing press and before we had modern media, where we weren't as distracted as we are now. Also, there's the prepackaged belief systems that we're offered. And from our earliest days as children, we start to learn that there are things like capitalism, communism, Christianity, Judaism, and our parents and others influence us to take one of those prepackaged belief systems, and then we don't really have to think about it anymore. If it wasn't for the distraction and the conditioning of it's simple, let's just go along with the herd. We don't want to make trouble. We don't want to be an outcast. So we'll just go along with what we're told. And the culture currently tells us that the universe is an accident. Life is an accident. The human race is an accident. Consciousness is an accident. It's all an accident. And we don't have to think about it anymore. If we didn't have that to anchor our thoughts and make them kind of gel into a fixed position, and then we can kind of go on with our lives and not have to think about it anymore, we would be more naturally contemplative, like children are. The awe, the wonder, what's going on here? What a wonderful place. What are all these things? What's that, Daddy? Oh, we call that a tree. Wow. What is a tree? And so on. All of that is kind of replaced by automatic. This is what it is. You don't have to think about it anymore. And that's why I started the book by talking about the inner life and the fact that the inner life has been going on for much longer than science has been going on. And they didn't part company until very recently, 100, 150, 200 years ago. All the scientists who used to be called natural philosophers, they totally believed in God as well as in science. There was no black and white dichotomy. But, in this fast moving world that's been created in our culture, everything is about, let's get on with it. We have a lot of things to do. It's too confusing. We have to simplify it. I think in our last interview conversation, I explained my idea that within my own mind as I grew up, I didn't accept the prepackaged beliefs. I wanted to think things out for myself, and I knew I was capable of many different states of consciousness, some far more effective from a pragmatic, practical, and making me happy point of view than other states. And the state which I was naturally in, which I now associate with the default network in the brain, is essentially a chaotic process of impulses arising one after the other, and then we impulsively choose which ones to act upon. I call that emergency oversimplification procedure. And one of the key backbones of EOP is everything's got to be either black or white. Forget that there might be a continuum of gray in between. That's too complicated. We haven't got time. We have to just put it in one pigeonhole or the other. So we quickly classify things that way, and it becomes habitual. And if we've put something into the bad box, the guys who wear the black hats, the bad guys, that side, it's going to be very hard later on to convince us that those people and those ideas aren't bad because of the continuously self-reinforcing of the dichotomy. So I started by talking about the inner life in order to establish that there's some sensibility to it, to scientists who are very determined to stick to facts and things that have been established by proof. Now, anything that takes place within the sanctity of one person's own mind isn't subject to what we currently define as scientific proof. You can't prove it. So in my life, I think as we discussed last time, the most effective state of consciousness that I found and that other people have found throughout the ages is sometimes experienced as inspiration, ideas coming to us. When we get in the flow state, as it's been called for the last 20 years, and I guess, didn't have a real scientific name before that. Things seem to be doing themselves. It's as if the universe has taken over our bodies and our minds and is flowing through us, and it's all coming out perfect, not just perfect to ourselves, but the other people around us sense it as perfect. It happens in athletics. It happens in musical performance. It happens when we're writing something. It happens when we're speaking extemporaneously, if we're lucky. In order to get into that state, we have to drop elements of the EOP that get in the way, like eagerness for other people's respect and applause and fear of failure. Those are parts of EOP. And if we're feeling those things, it's going to get in the way of the flow state. One thing I noticed about the flow state as I was growing up is that I experienced it more under certain conditions. So, being a scientist at heart, I used inductive reasoning. You can't set up a control group. You can't do a true experiment, but you can do scientific observation, which is where science begins. The scientific method starts with careful observation, followed by the forming of hypotheses, forming by the conducting of experiments, formal experiments with a control group, where you can actually determine what is truth. So I knew I couldn't do experiments, so I would have to do the best I could. So I'd have to use inductive logic. I would have to watch what happened to me when I performed one way, let's say selfishly, or when I performed another way, let's say unselfishly. That was my experiment. I did that. Initially, I did that unconsciously, and then I became conscious of it, and then I did it consciously. And what I found was when I acted unselfishly, everything went much better for me as well as for other people. It was a double benefit. And I wasn't doing it kind of like gaming the system. If you learn something like that, you can slip right back into EOP and decide, okay, all I have to do is pretend to be doing things unselfishly. And I tried that too. And it didn't work. The universe didn't come in and flow through me and make me do things perfectly. It only did it when I was being authentic and unselfish. So what do you conclude when that happens? When it happens thousands of times throughout a lifetime, at this stage, a very long lifetime, what do you do? Because you can't prove it with a formal scientific experiment, you have to not use it? Does that make common sense? No, it makes common sense. That's why I had to share this. I had to try to explain it to people so that they could try out acting the way the universe would like us to act, which we have an intuition for, because we can put ourselves in the universe's shoes. Now, to get to my point, I do believe, based on my experiences, that the universe is conscious, that in fact, there's only one consciousness. It's like one person living through, like in a video game where you have an avatar. You remember in old style board games 100 years ago, you had pieces you moved on the Monopoly board. In this case, you inhabit that creature. If you're the one self, you have the capability of spawning a piece of yourself. You don't lose anything by doing that. You still have your whole self. But on top of that, you've spawned a representation of yourself, a manifestation of yourself with some of your strengths, and you give it free will. And it's kind of like a game, but it's a serious game, because free will leads to error, and error leads to suffering. And you're the one who's suffering because you're living through that creature. And the creature, maybe in another part of the multiverse, knows that that's what's going on. That's the game over there in that other universe.
One question I want to ask you about is you talk about the unified field theory in your book, and I'd love for you to explain for our listeners what that is and why was it important for you to include that?
Well, it was because consciousness wasn't directly included, but it was invoked. So Einstein wanted to have physics all brought together into one theory, and it was splintered into pieces of what he knew had to be one theory. He had a very strong intuition, and he was very open about it. He said he didn't believe that this universe was created accidentally. It didn't seem that way to him. It was too complicated and perfect for it to have happened accidentally, so that there had to be an intelligence behind the universe of some sort. And he said on a number of occasions that his religion, his God, was worshiping the intelligence that the universe exhibited, that intelligence that made the universe intelligible to us, that we could actually make sense of it. That was his religion. So anyway, he and others discovered that there were four forces in nature: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, gravitation, and electromagnetism. And at the point that he had achieved with his contributions of relativity and his being collaborative with the people who brought in quantum theory, Max Planck, Niels Bohr, et cetera, he worked with them, but he wasn't directly the original progenitor of quantum theory, but he didn't stand in its way, other than the fact that it seemed to postulate accidentalism. He wanted to connect quantum theory and relativity. He wanted to bring gravity in to what was unified already, which was the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. Science 50 years ago knew how those three things fit together. Brilliant in itself already, unprecedented in history, but he wanted to get gravity to fit in. And he never achieved that. But along the way, in addition to his stating as one of the great minds in history and the great minds of physics that he didn't believe in accidentalism, which was a very important stand to take, he said, let's think about relativity this way. And he did a series of thought experiments. And in every thought experiment, he had an observer. Now, an observer implies consciousness. The only thing we know that exists in the universe that can observe is a consciousness. So implicit in his work, there was consciousness. That's as far as he went. Now then, there was a person that he mentored, another one of the greatest physicists of all time, John Archibald Wheeler, who, along with Einstein and Niels Bohr, helped create the nuclear theory that led to nuclear weapons, as well as television, as well as nuclear atomic power. Wheeler went much further than Einstein did in focusing on the concept of consciousness. Ultimately, what he said was that before consciousness existed, the universe, in fact, did exist. It had matter and energy in it. Like Einstein, he saw matter and energy as two forms of the same thing. He came up with ways, equations, where you could convert one to the other, where you could turn two photons, light, a form of energy, if they collided, turned into an electron and a positron, part of material matter. So matter and energy existed, Wheeler said, in his anthropic principle, the full name, participatory anthropic principle, meaning that the universe doesn't exist as we know it without consciousness. He believed, or he went along with, the theory that the universe occurred as an accident. I'll come back to his exception to that, but it happened as an accident. But then in the accidental process, we got to matter, and we got to life, and we got to consciousness. When we got to consciousness, the nature of that universe changed when consciousness beheld something which he called probability waves. He said that, yes, matter and energy existed as probabilities, not as determined fixed objects. There were no solid things. There were probabilities of those solid things. But when consciousness intercepted those things, they froze into place and they became solid. To me, one of the most important things that's happened in the last 5-6 years is that Stephen Hawking, who, as far as I know, had not come out in favor of that participatory anthropic principle until he wrote his last book, the year of his death. He came out and several times cited it in his final book. So here we have three of the giants of modern physics, all of them in their own ways, accepting the idea that consciousness is crucially important to what the universe is. Now, the really good news that's occurred, at least in my mind, only in the last 3 years, is there's been a swing in physics, kind of towards the idea I've been espousing for about 50 years, that the universe is conscious. Most of these physicists and philosophers, some of whom met very recently at Marist College, near to where I live, and on September 25th of this year, like a week or two ago, came out with an article in Scientific American in which these scientists and philosophers in considerable numbers have taken the position that consciousness is inherent in the fabric of the universe. And they've used a name that a guy came up with in the 16th century. Francesco Patrizzi came up with this name, panpsychism, which means that there's consciousness in everything, even in the smallest quarks, atoms, the tiniest things in the universe have consciousness. And some of these physicists and philosophers are saying what I'm saying. And this is a week old. Last time you and I spoke, I knew nothing of this. Here it is. So many scientists are already most of the way there. And they also use the term cosmopsychism, which is pretty much exactly my idea. Not entirely fleshed out in terms of all of the, how does it relate to flow state? The fact that we're avatars, that we're all one self, all human beings are one self, that we should be cooperative to each other and kind and respectful to each other because we're really all one thing. We're all the same person. If we punch someone in the face, we just punched ourselves in the face. Very practical, down-to-earth consequences of this theory. Paul Draper, and I'm going to quote from the article which I have open on my other computer here, says, if the idea is correct, then God exists. So he gets the message. He got it independently of reading my stuff.
Well, Bill, I found your book, A Theory of Everything, Including Consciousness and God, to be such a profound read. It's something that I've picked up and I've been reading over and over and over again. I'm getting something new every time. But on this note, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
If you want to stop divorce fast, you do not need to waste years in therapy. You do not need to work on yourself, and you do not even have to have your spouse on board. If your spouse wants out, if they're filing for divorce, separation, or having an affair, what you need is a proven process to turn your marriage around. Book a free breakthrough session with us at highthrivecoaching.com/apply.
Dr. Richard London, who has 25 years of experience being known as the Man of Steel with the Heart of Velvet, presents the Life Wellness System, The Road to Yes, a mentoring system that brings you to becoming a wellness heir. Imagine having wealth, wellness, love, peace, and spirituality in abundance and balance now. Visit doctorateoflife.com or call 720-213-8021 for a free 15-minute wellness evaluation.
Hi, this is Jana Wilson, author of Wise Little One, Learning to Love and Listen to My Inner Child, a best-selling prescriptive memoir in inner child healing. I'm also the founder of the Emotional Healing System. The inner child, simply put, is your feelings, both positive and negative. If you'd like to learn to love and listen to your wise little one, pick up my book at Amazon or visit my website at janawilson.com. It's never too late to have a happy childhood.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. We're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with Emmy Award winner Bill Harvey in regards to his new book, A Theory of Everything, including consciousness and God.
Now, let me go back. I said a little while ago that there was something special about what Wheeler had said about the universe and being created accidentally. Quantum theory, according to the standard theory, which is believed around the world right now by all physicists, although it's subject to being constantly updated by new information, scientists are open-minded about everything but introspection being a valid form of evidence. And they don't seem to be particularly open-minded to the idea of God. That's why in my book, I say, maybe we should just call it the conscious, intelligent universe, because the word God triggers people and they have reactions of rejection. And let's just use a different word. Wheeler said, and this is consistent with quantum theory, that even in nothingness, something is happening. Max Planck, Niels Bohr, all of them took that position that there is no such thing as total nothingness. In the nothingness, these probabilities exist. And Wheeler gave it a name, the quantum foam. And in the quantum foam, which pre-existed the Big Bang, virtual particles were constantly coming into existence and disappearing over and over again. In my book, I say, this doesn't sound like what we see in the world that we perceive externally to our consciousness. Through our consciousness, we look at and we see solid objects. We don't see things arising and disappearing. In fact, the only place that I can think of where we see objects appearing and disappearing is in our consciousness. It sounds like consciousness to me. Anyway, he didn't say that, but he said that there was this state before the Big Bang. And in my book, I say, well, if the quantum foam existed before the Big Bang, could the quantum foam be consciousness? And this is my way of trying to build bridges with physics.
I think you bring some very good points, and he probably didn't say exactly what you said because he doesn't want to copy your book. But I mean, because your book has been out for some time. I mean, the principles you bring into discussion today, and you've had discussions about, are not new to you. You've been developing these for some time.
Well, it started in 1969. Well, it started earlier than that. I think I'm repeating something I said in my interview with you before, but it's worth repeating, that I was very mentally conscious, introspective, all of my life, as far back as I can remember, like age 2 and on. But I was always, now this contradicts something I said earlier. I wasn't exactly right when I said this earlier today in today's program, that I didn't accept established viewpoints. I did. I accepted science. I totally accepted science. And therefore, I rejected the idea of God from as early as I could remember. And then when I was 12 years old, I had come to some of my suggestions in Mind Magic about how to get the most use out of our minds and how to get into the flow state, is to detect the different personalities in your own mind. One of which, of course, is emergency oversimplification procedure. And within EOP, we can detect a thought and we can say, oh my gosh, that isn't my own idea. I heard Billy Heyer say that thought. I'm just repeating. He's a guy I admired, so I'm repeating his thought. So I was watching my thoughts and classifying them as to whether I thought they were my thoughts, really my thoughts, or somebody else's thoughts that I had internalized. And I found that there was one voice that I heard that I would call kind of like, I called it the master voice, or my uncle, or inspiration. It was information that I didn't have any right to have from my own experience. It was information that was coming in from someplace outside. It was stored elsewhere in the universe, and it was being passed to me by some process. And so I knew this master voice. And whenever it gave me advice, I took it because it was always right. It was the only sane, always right advice that I got. Didn't get it that often, but when I got it and I knew I got it, it was a very soft speaking voice. If my head was full of jumbled thoughts and I was mumbling to myself in my mind, it wouldn't get through. It was only in moments of silence that it could get through. So at 12, I was standing on a bus stop and I suddenly heard that voice in my mind say, I am God and so is everyone else. And I knew that there had been a train of thought going on in the back of my mind, kind of unconsciously, subconsciously, but I was kind of following it a little bit, like listening in, but I was distracted. I was looking at things and thinking other things. But I said, how did I get that idea? Where did that come from? Well, I know it came from the master voice. It must be true. But how could it be true? How could it be true? It must be true. I have to figure out how it could be true. So between then and 1969, consciously and unconsciously, I was always working on how could it be true? And in 1969, it suddenly all clicked into place that we could all be avatars of one self. And that when that self, that must be the master voice, when that self comes in, whether it's in a voice in our minds or just taking over a performance on stage or on the ball field or wherever, that's when the full universe power comes through us and we're doing things perfectly. A highly desirable place to be, what Maslow would call a peak experience. It all fitted together. And so I started to write about it only years later. It was around 1975 when I came up with the idea for a book I called The Theory of the Conscious Universe. I had started writing Mind Magic in 72 and published it in 76. But in 75, I conceptualized the idea of the theory of the conscious universe. And of course, anyone who would listen to me, I would talk their ear off. And often I was a guest on a TV show or a radio show, or I was giving a speech to the World Future Society or whatever it was. I remember I was on a panel once with Bucky Fuller. I would never stop talking about the theory of the conscious universe. So yeah, I put the idea out there. It was then mentioned, the theory of the conscious universe was mentioned in other things I published, articles in the Yoga Journal, here, there, and everywhere, Mother Earth News, a little booklet I put out in 75 called Our Client, the Planet, had the idea in it. But then I put out a book, which is kind of a predecessor to this new book. The difference being that the new book stays within the bounds of the words will tend to prevent a scientist who's reading it from slamming it shut. But in 2014, the book that I put out, You Are the Universe, I didn't have that filter. I just put it down as it came through me. So there's a lot of speculation in You Are the Universe that would have caused the scientist to slam the book in the first 20 pages, probably. So this is a condensation of that. So yeah, I've been putting it out for years. It may have had an effect. It may have had no effect. You know, the universe is not just talking to me, it's talking to all of us. Potentially millions, billions of people could be hearing these messages. You know, I'll give you an example. Ann Hampton Calloway, the singer-songwriter, my wife and I, my wife knows her from some previous work that they did together. We went to see her at 54 in Manhattan a couple of months ago. And she was telling a story about a song she wrote dedicated It was a tribute to Joni Mitchell. And as she was writing the song, she said, I wasn't writing this. I was taking dictation, which is some exact words that I've used for a long time. She said it from the stage, just taking dictation. So a lot of people have this experience. Maybe what is unique about my work is I've put a lot of different things together, a lot of pieces together, and I've tried to relate it to a couple of specific things. What I'm trying to do is have an effect on the condition of the world. There are two, I don't know, big ideas, immodestly. One of them is the idea that we can actually become masters of our own minds. Each and every one of us can get into higher states of consciousness. Here's the ways to do it. That's in Mind Magic and a new book I'm doing now, which is kind of commentary on mind magic, expanding on the thoughts. It's called Powerful Mind, probably come out next year. So that's one of my missions, is to try to get people to try out these suggestions for ways of using your mind. The other one is to leave your mind open to the possibility that we are all one being. Just, I'm not saying believe it. I don't like believing. I mean, I like faith and hope. Those are good things. But believing could lead you into all kinds of trouble. What if you believe in communism? Believing in things is risky. I'm trying to do is, you have to bet on what reality is. You're in reality. You have to live through reality. You have to bet on what you think it is. If you don't make a bet, you're an EOP. You're just going along with whatever happens, or going along with the crowd, trying not to make waves. The world is right now headed towards the opposite of what America was created to do. We didn't want to have tyranny. We wanted every person to have a chance to succeed. That's exactly what the universe wants. Why does the universe want that? Because it's being benevolent to itself. It is us. Why wouldn't it want every one of us to succeed? We're all God's children. Ancient saying. Jesus said it. Totally true. We're all God's children. That's it. And I'm not saying to believe it. I'm saying if you keep your mind open to it and you use the tricks, whatever you want to call them, in mind magic, you'll get these inspirations. You'll get into the flow state. You will see that being unselfish and kind and respectful works better for you. Don't put down other people. Don't foreclose the possibility that the other party might have a good idea every now and then. Keep an open mind about it. The other party is you. Every party is you. You is every party. It's all one thing.
So you touch on something I'd like to cover with you. So how does this all relate with today's spiritual traditions that we have?
Well, in the book, what I say is, I ask that question in the book, and I ask, how well does this line up with the existing spiritual traditions? And what I find is it lines up in a number of ways. So, and at least, I'm reading from the book now, in at least these 4 specific areas: receiving guidance from above, consciousness survival after death, the importance of continuous kindness, and surrendering to control by the one self. The theory of the conscious universe lines up very well with spiritual traditions on Earth.
That's very interesting how that all comes together. And from your standpoint, when we look at consciousness and spirituality, In many ways, are these pretty much the same thing? Is consciousness a more deeper connection? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, consciousness is the ability to have experiences with continuity, which means to be able to perceive ourselves as an entity that persists through what we experience as time. So it's a continuous viewpoint, and it's our continuous viewpoint. So that's my definition of consciousness. Back in the old days, consciousness and spirit were the same thing. Mind, consciousness, and spirit were interchangeable terms to Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, St. Aquinas, and St. Augustine, and so on. They believed all those were the same thing. Oh, and soul I left out, all the same thing. So I think there's a consistency there as well. Then the question is, what about the physical body? Well, as I think you said in the first interview that we did, I believe that time and space, matter and energy, our bodies included, are all projected into the field of consciousness. All that really exists is the field of consciousness. And in the field of consciousness, you have the entirety of it, and then you have these pieces of it, but each piece, like a hologram, contains the whole. All of the Spirit of God is in each of us. Not all of the talents and capabilities and functionality of God is in each of us. We're not omniscient. We can't perceive all of time simultaneously. I believe the reason the universe created time is to break things down into bite-sized pieces, because he didn't give us enough computing power to perceive everything together the way he/she can, the way the one can. So in order to create this game, these avatars that he wanted to give free will to see what happens, to make the game more exciting for himself, herself, and to percolate up as people evolve across lifetimes, these little bits of himself, herself, that are us, as we learn ethically and in every other way, all the things that the one self knows, as we learn all of those things, from one incarnation to the next, I believe we're given more power, more computing power. We can keep more of it in our heads. We can concentrate on it more than we could at a lower state of evolution. And I believe that way, subatomic particles become amoebas, become higher forms of life than we ourselves factually know about. Quote unquote angels, for example, or in my sci-fi novels, agents of cosmic intelligence, kind of like angels, but a different branch of the service. And eventually, where we go when we win the game, when we've learned everything God wants us to know, we become reabsorbed into God as a personality aspect of God, living in God's mind consciously as a part of God. That's where I think we wind up, my theory.
Well, I think your theories make a lot of sense, and I really appreciate that we're able to spend this time and talk about this. One of the things you cover in your book, and you have a whole chapter on it, is suffering. So why is that?
Well, it comes along with the job. You know, if we are caretakers of free will, and I do believe we have free will, I mean, it would be awfully boring for God if we didn't have free will. He'd just be watching a marionette play for eternity. How boring could that be? Free will makes it possible for God to have some degree of surprise. Of course, God could foretell all of this stuff, but it's the dynamically changing, at least within our sphere of things. We make mistakes. We're not perfect. We don't inherit all of God. When we're born, we're a blank slate. Well, not entirely. We have, the DNA. We have probably some trickle in of memories from former lives. As we become more evolved, we might be able to remember more of our former lives. But essentially, because we don't know everything, we proceed by trial and error. And every time we make an error, we suffer and cause suffering. And so God had to make a decision. If I have this game, I'm going to be causing myself and my children suffering. Is it worth it? Yes. We know God came to that conclusion because here we are. Now, this particular planet, part of my theory, and I don't think it's in the new book because it's a little too far out, but it's in You Are the Universe. I believe that God has different experiments going on in different planets and different universes, perhaps, because I do believe in the multiverse theory that this is one of many universes going on side by side, all of it part of oneself. Why is it that the planet Earth is at the very fringe of the Milky Way galaxy? There are billions of stars, God knows how many planets. God could be having a different experiment on each one of these. And the riskier experiments might logically be consigned far from the center of things like galaxies, where they could do the least harm. Just a possibility, not an essential part of my theory, but it would fit right neatly in with our history of constant warfare, constant tyranny. America, of course, being created to stop the tyranny, but now itself somehow interested in becoming a tyranny again. At any rate, we must have more suffering in a more experimental planet. So it could be that we're suffering above average for the average planet. The average planet might have more of a sense of oneness. I mean, even some of the species, other than human beings, cooperate much better with each other. Ants, bees, flights of birds, schools of fish. You see, they're in such synchronous motion with each other, like synchronized swimming. It's all too perfect. Their minds must be melded with each other. They must be in a group mind state, a flow state with each other. At those times, we observe them moving together like that. And it's harder for us because we seem to be fascinated by the idea of independence, individual independence. I want to do it my way. I want to learn it from myself. I don't want to go by what my parents taught me based on their experience. They want to try to save me suffering. No, I want to suffer it. I want to experience it for myself. I want sovereignty. I want my tribe to have sovereignty. Of course, I want to control that. And this idea of power, this idea of independence, these are some of the things that cause more suffering than other ideas that we have. If we can bring those ideas into balance with the other ideas, they don't necessarily have to cause suffering. But they're riskier ideas than the others. So God is well aware of all of these things, well aware of these ideals that exist: equality, freedom, independence, and then testing different combinations of these things on different planets. Maybe that's what she is doing.
I think that is a very provocative thought, and it would be interesting for anyone to consider that we're the only beings out there. I know nowadays that's something that's finally being questioned again. So it's nice to be able to look at this in a way that's more inclusive in many ways, that there's more than just us.
I hope so. And I don't think it's commonsensical that this is like the only sentient race in the universe. I believe that sentience exists everywhere. I mean, this is part of why I'm so thrilled by this Scientific America article, that panpsychism believes that there's sentience everywhere, atoms, etc., not to mention birds and so on. The fact that scientists, even within, it's a subculture, and people don't want to be disincluded from it for saying the wrong thing or stepping out of line. I think the bias against God goes back. It started to be rationalized in the so-called Enlightenment in the 18th century, using Occam's razor, which was a principle not of science per se, but the idea of parsimony or elegance in a scientific theory. As scientists, let's agree that it's more wonderful if in our theories we use the fewest variables possible. And we'll call that after William of Ockham, who invented the idea, Occam's razor, in honor of him. Great idea. Einstein had something to say about it. He said, we should make science as simple as possible, but not more simple. In other words, he was afraid of oversimplification. He was afraid that scientists would go too far. And as they have been saying, we don't need to use God. We don't need to invoke God. It's in this article. It's a good article. It states both sides of the argument, which is wonderful. I'm glad there is the panpsychist side to the argument coming out for the public to see. It's been suppressed for too long.
Well, there's so much great information in your book. I had such a fabulous time reading it. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your community, and where they can purchase their own copy of A Theory of Everything, including Consciousness and God?
Well, the website is humaneffectivenessinstitute.org. Not a .com because it's a nonprofit, so .org, humaneffectivenessinstitute.org.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, totally my honor. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill. You are such an inspiration, and I so enjoyed A Theory of Everything, including Consciousness and God. Make sure to visit Bill's website at humaneffectivenessinstitute.org for more information on all of his books and to be part of his community. You can pick up your copy of A Theory of Everything, including Consciousness and God, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. And of course, visit Bill's website. Again, that's humaneffectivenessinstitute.org. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary.
A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.